Let's continue with the examples. And as I said, use these stories for yourself as well. Then tell a story about yourself too. For example, I often share this from my own life story. Let's say I'm going to talk about success. I'll be speaking to business people, or I don't know, as a life coach, you'll also be on a journey towards success. There will be ups and downs along the way. I always say this: success doesn't happen because of others, it happens in spite of others. What does this mean? Now, we tend to think like this. When we come up with a new idea or create a new project, we think that everyone around us will support us. But you know what? Most of the time, that's not how it goes. When we come up with a new idea, it's often those closest to us who hold us back. They say things like, don't bring in new inventions, or don't bother with those things, or you're always dealing with weird stuff, this and that. That's why most of the time success doesn't happen because of others, but in spite of them. Now I have two older brothers. Well, I started getting really interested in these topics when I was about 15. At that time, I was interested in writing. And since I started playing the ney, I began to learn Sufi sayings. I was interested in those too. My family is not a family that's into these things. My brothers definitely aren't. They have nothing to do with it. They're the tough guys of the neighborhood. And here I am dealing with things like this. They used to make fun of me saying, our kid has lost his mind, he's busy with these kinds of things, because I love literature, you know. For example, back then I had memorized something from Fuzuli. He says this: the water is sunlight, it has not turned the color of the world, I do not know, or perhaps my eyes have become an ocean and the water has not turned to the world. Yes, I admit I'm not exactly normal either, I accept that. I mean, I should have been out playing ball, but this is a tendency. Life steered me in that direction. That was the kind of pleasure I got from life, but there was always some mockery. While I was dealing with writing, going to courses, and getting involved with music, there were always attitudes like, are you going to be a musician or something? Despite all that, somehow I moved forward. Years passed, my books were published, people started to get to know me, they started to recognize me through social media. One day I appeared on a television program and my older brother watched it too. After the program, he called me and said, Hakan, I watched you. You spoke really well. He said, I'm proud of you. He said, and I want to tell you something. I said, oh, go ahead, brother. He said, you know what? He said, even back then I knew you would get to this point. I said, I'm sure that's true, brother. But I realized once again right there that this is really how it works. When you try something people aren't used to, everyone says, oh, don't bother with such silly things. But when you succeed and keep going despite everything, they say, I was always by your side, I knew you would make it, and then they come to you. For example, this story gave us a message, didn't it? Naturally, sincerely, and from the heart. I always tell this story. But when you go out there and tell people, others will try to hold you back, never mind them, just keep going on your path, that message doesn't get through. But when you share a story from your own life, it does reach them. For example, I also often tell this story. I mean, I say that sometimes on your journey you will have to block out what you hear. In fact, most of the time, you'll have to tune out those around you. Because when you do things that others couldn't, you might remind them of their own failures. And people who are not at peace with themselves will constantly criticize you. So one day some frogs were having a race. They were supposed to climb a hill. All right then. So at that moment, the announcer clearly says, are you guys ready? Let's start. Then the spectators start shouting, you can't make it, you can't do it. It's impossible to climb up there. A frog can't accomplish that. As they kept saying things like frogs get tired quickly, the frogs who heard these words started giving up one by one. They gave up, and gave up. But one of them kept going despite everything and made it to the top. Then, out of breath, it came back down. They interviewed this one. They asked, how did you manage to do it? And said things like, congratulations. And it replied, sorry, I can't hear you. Could you please speak a little louder? Now look, this story conveys the straightforward sentence I mentioned earlier in a much more beautiful way, adding a bit of humor but still delivering the intended message. That way you establish an incredible connection with your audience. So you say, yes, sometimes you need to shut your ears to everyone in order to reach the top. If you don't shut your ears to others, this won't work. If you don't shut your ears to others, you won't be able to get there. And knowing this from the start at least prepares you for the challenges you'll face. Because if you move forward always expecting something wonderful to happen, you'll end up disappointed. That's exactly what stories do. Now, for example, if you were to explain this, what would you share from your own personal story? Think about this. We'll continue in the next video. Again, we'll look at which stories we tell in certain situations, but stop here. If I were to tell this story, what example would I give from my own life story? Because my advice is this. Let's do this trilogy. First, make a straightforward statement, not a very long one. For example, true success does not simply come because of the help of other people, but rather despite the challenges posed by others. After that, you should share a compelling story, for instance, the frog story, and so on. Then tell a story from your own life related to this. This is the most effective way. Sometimes you might not be able to find a story from your own life, so you can use two of them. But you definitely need to include the story part. Now pause, think about this, then we will continue.